poetry finds its voice. I'm Tamara Rockwood, and I believe poems weren't made to sit still. They were made to be spoken, felt, lived, eaten. Here on Bainbridge Island, where gray skies and salt air are part of the rhythm, my husband Ben and I run Bainbridge Island Press, and we publish poets who write from somewhere real. But publishing isn't enough. These words need breath behind them. They need to be heard. So today, we're pairing poetry with rain. The steady kind. The kind that taps on windows and makes you stay a little longer. The kind that blurs edges and turns everything inward. Rain has always belonged to poets. It's grief and renewal in the same drop. It's the excuse to cancel plans and the reason to finally sit down and write. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we don't fight the rain. We learn to live inside it. And poets have been doing that for centuries, finding language for something that falls without asking permission. So, pour something warm, settle in, and let's read together. Welcome to Poetics. Okay, I'm going to be going through 5 poems, so I'm going to try and keep it a little brief just because otherwise I could probably spend 2 hours talking about them. But we don't want to do that. So we're going to start with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. He wrote the poem, The Rainy Day. And I will read that briefly. Okay, The Rainy Day. The day is cold and dark and dreary. It rains and the wind is never weary. The vine still clings to the moldering wall, but at every gust the dead leaves fall, and the day is dark and dreary. My life is cold and dark and dreary. It rains and the wind is never weary. My thoughts still cling to the moldering past, but the hopes of youth fall thick in the blast, and the days are dark and dreary. Be still, sad heart, and cease repining. Behind the clouds is the sun still shining. Thy fate is the common fate of all. Into each life some rain must fall. Some days must be dark and dreary. That's pleasantly optimistic while being dreary. Okay, so why was this written? Longfellow wrote that he wrote this at his childhood home in Portland, Maine. And likely he was still carrying the grief of his the death of his first wife, Mary, who died 6 years earlier during a miscarriage while they were traveling in Europe, which is so terrifyingly sad. The poem was first published in a British magazine in 1841, and then it was collected in ballads and other poems the following year. So what is interesting about this poem is the structure does something really sneaky. So the first 2 stanzas repeat dreary at the end, but the rhyme scheme circles back on itself. And so the structure is A-A-B-B-A. And that structure, so what I always say is that the form of the poem must reflect the function of the poem. So the form reflects the function. And in this, the form is A-A-B-B-A. It is trapping you in the gloom. That's the function of the poem. But then the final stanza breaks that pattern, and the word dreary disappears from the first line, and the rhyme scheme opens up to A-A-B-B-C. And then the form itself enacts the shift from despair to acceptance. Isn't that fascinating? So when you read the line, into each life some rain must fall, that has become so common that we forget that it came from a poem. And so it's kind of interesting. Longfellow really gave the English language a proverb through this, which is what poetry usually does. Now, how does this change how we see rain? Rain becomes something shared. It is not your personal misery. It is the common fate of all. Longfellow takes the thing that we usually complain about, and he says, this is what connects you to everyone else who has ever lived. You are not alone in your great days. And what the poem is telling us, lovingly, is stop fighting. The sun is still there, even if you can't see it. Your hopes will fall like leaves. That's not failure, that's being human. The command, be still, sad heart, isn't dismissive. It's tender. It's what you would say to a child who's been crying too long. I love this poem because grief is so difficult. I have no idea how to deal with grief. I don't know if anyone does. Probably they do. I don't. Grief is something that is so overwhelming, and I can't fix it. I can't think my way out of it. I can't bring someone back. I can't stop something from happening. Grief it just is so, it's like molasses. And so this poem is so helpful in acknowledging how terrible it is. Every day is dreary. How inescapable it is. And yet at the end, it's reassuring that it isn't dismissive. This is what it means to live. So, oh, Longfellow. Okay, number 2. This is Rain by Edward Thomas. Now, Edward Thomas is really interesting. Edward Thomas was a poet, but he actually only wrote for the last 3 years of his life. He was an English poet, he was a critic, he was a nature writer, and before he wrote poetry, he spent a couple decades just grinding out prose to support his family. So it was biographies, reviews, essays, travel writing, and he thought that it was bleak. And so when he met Robert Frost in 1914, Frost encouraged him to try poetry. And then Thomas wrote all of his poems between 1914 and his death in 1917. And he didn't die of old age, unfortunately. He enlisted in the infantry in 1915, and I am very sorry to say that he was killed at the Battle of Arras in 1917. But his poetry sits in an odd place, I think, because he's connected to the Georgians and their love of the English countryside. But he was darker. I think that he was more modern. And critics see him as this bridge between Victorian nature poetry and then the modernist period of Auden and Hughes. And he has recurring themes of solitude and disconnection and the shadow of the war, even though right now and in his poetry, he never writes about the war. He writes about rain or roads or trees. Poetry, there was one critic that I found, I don't know who the critic was, but one critic said that poetry seemed to free him from his obsession with thinking out his motives. And I think that it was just an escape. I think that's what I'm saying. Okay, so this is Rain by Edward Thomas. And I need to find it. There it is. Okay, Rain by Edward Thomas. Rain. Midnight rain, nothing but the wild rain on this bleak hut, and solitude, and me, remembering again that I shall die, and neither hear the rain nor give it thanks for washing me cleaner than I have been since I was born into this solitude. Blessed are the dead that the rain rains upon, but here I pray that none whom once I loved is dying tonight, or is lying still awake, solitarily listening to the rain, either in pain or thus in symphony, helpless among the living and the dead, like a cold water among broken reeds, myriads of broken reeds, all still and stiff, like me who have no love, which this wild rain has not dissolved, except the love of death, if love it be towards what is perfect and cannot, the tempest tells me, disappoint. So, it's not it's not about flowers. I would love to see what I need to find a poem by Edward Thomas about flowers. It would probably be about death. I'm sorry I'm giggling so much. It's so sad. It's just so sad. Okay, why was this sad poem written? Thomas wrote about this from Hut 51 at a military training camp in England in 1916. And he was 37, so he's old enough to avoid service, but he went anyway. This poem is drawing on an earlier memory, a storm in his youth that drove him to shelter at an inn where he sat alone at a window staring into the dark. And that isolation stayed with him. A year after writing this poem, Thomas was killed in battle, and he never saw his poetry published, which is also extremely sad. So what is interesting about this poem? Why are we reading this extremely sad poem? This is a war poem that never mentions the war. There are no trenches, there's no guns, there's no enemy. It's just rain and a man alone with his thoughts. The opening line is, rain, midnight rain, nothing but the wild rain. And so this is repeating rain 3 times, and it's mimicking the relentless drumming of the rain on the roof. The whole poem is one stanza. It is one unbroken thought. It's written in blank verse, but there are no pauses, and there's no relief, and you're trapped in there with him. And so that's what we were saying before, is the function of the poem is to trap you in there with him. There's a line, the blessed are the dead that the rain rains upon. And this actually echoes the Beatitudes, but it inverts them. So it is not the meek or the merciful who are blessed, it is the dead, because they're done. So how does this change how we see the rain? The rain becomes a kind of baptism that you didn't ask for. It washes you cleaner than I have been since I was born into this solitude. But it also dissolves everything. It dissolves love, it dissolves hope, it dissolves connection. So what is left when the rain has taken everything? Only the love of death, which Thomas admits might be the only thing that cannot disappoint. So what this poem is telling us, this very, very sad poem, is that loneliness is the condition. It is not a phase. It is not a mood. It is the condition. And Thomas prays that no one he loves is awake tonight, listening to this same rain, feeling the same helplessness. He imagines them all as broken reeds in cold water, stiff and still, beyond saving. This poem does not offer comfort. It offers company. Someone else has sat in the dark and thought, maybe the only reliable thing is the end. I am telling you, it is not. There are friends, there are people that it's never, the only reliable thing is love. But this is a very sad poem. I'm going to move on because that was too sad even for me. I think the next best poem that I have is Rain by Raymond Carver. Okay, Rain by Raymond Carver. Woke up this morning with a terrific urge to lie in bed all day and read. Fought against it for a minute. Then looked out the window at the rain and gave over. Put myself entirely in the keep of this rainy morning. Would I live my life over again? Make the same unforgivable mistakes? Yes, given half a chance. Yes. Thank you, Carver. Okay, so this was written in the 80s. And so why was this written? Carver was born in Oregon, and in northern Oregon, and he spent most of his life in the Pacific Northwest. I wanted to clarify northern Oregon because I think Oregon and Washington are gravely misunderstood, as well as Idaho. And I say this because I think like 2/3 of all three states are desert, but there's a lot of it that is the Pacific Northwest. Boise is in a desert. Bend, Oregon is in a desert. Walla Walla is in a desert. And so they're complicated states. It's not all trees and orcas. I want to say for the record, there are no orcas in Idaho. Okay, so he was in northern Oregon, and he spent most of his life in the Pacific Northwest. And he knew rain the way that, I don't know, it was part of him. The poem comes from his later years after he had remained sober, which was wonderful, after he'd nearly destroyed his first marriage and his health, and then after he rebuilt a life with the poet Tess Gallagher, who is a gem of a person and a stellar poet in Port Townsend. I've watched her read many, many times, and I have her book. She just is such a remarkable book. But we're not talking about Tess Gallagher. I will do that next time because she's just wonderful. Anyways, he rebuilt a life with Tess Gallagher. Most of Carver's poetry was written in the 80s, and tragically he died of lung cancer when he was 50. And I want to point that all out because he writes poetry from his life, and so you kind of need to know a little bit about him to read his poetry. I think that his poem reads like someone who knows how much time he wasted, and he wouldn't trade it. What's interesting about it is it's barely a poem. It reads like a journal entry. It reads like a note scrawled on a napkin. There is no meter. There is no rhyme. There is no literary machinery. It is a man waking up and looking at the rain and deciding not to fight himself today. And then the pivot. Would I live my life over again? Make the same unforgivable mistakes? And the answer comes twice. Yes. And then again. Yes. And that repetition is the whole poem. The rain in this poem becomes permission. It is not gloom, and it is not melancholy. it is a release. The rain says, stay in bed. The rain says, you don't have to be productive today. The rain says, give over. And Carver uses the old phrase, in the keep of, like a castle, like being held. The rain is a place of safety. It is not a thing to endure. And that is why I chose this, is because I am very driven by action, and I have to be productive every day. And I fight myself on it because I'm also so interiorly engaged that I fight with myself of, you don't have to be productive today. Like you are already ahead. I'm just so terrified of missing something or doing something wrong. So I have all these lists and checklists and spreadsheets to make sure that everything is where it belongs. Everything is taken care of. And it's my futile attempt to make the world right, which it won't. But it's the least I can do. But it's futile, and I know that. And even if I spent a whole day only reading, and I didn't put the laundry away that is sitting on a chair in my bedroom, if I didn't put it away, if we just ordered pizza instead of making dinner, if if I didn't put 10,000 words on a page, I just am so overwhelmed with being productive. And the futility of that, I understand, is I'm only doing it so that I think that I'm in control of the universe around me. And you never are. I know this is getting to be a little bit ethereal, but I think that it's important. Not everyone has this. Thank goodness. Could you imagine? We'd just be a wreck. But there are some of us that understand this, and I appreciate Carver telling me, the rain says you don't have to be productive today. The rain is a place of safety. It is not a thing to endure. Regret is a trap. Carver doesn't say that he would avoid his mistakes. He says that he would make them again, because the mistakes were his life. All of the years, all of the failures, all of the chaos. And that was the path that led him to this quiet morning, to this book, to this bed, to this rain. The poem doesn't forgive the past. It accepts it, and that's harder. It is. It's harder. But that acceptance is something that maybe sometimes we need to remind ourselves. Maybe I need to remind myself. Number 4, rain towards morning. All right. This is Elizabeth Bishop, who also is absolutely lovely. And this is a shorter one too. So this is Rain Towards Morning by Elizabeth Bishop. The great light cage has broken up in the air, freeing, I think, about 1 million birds, whose wild descending shadows will not be back, and all the wires come falling down. No cage, no frightening birds. The rain is brightening now. The face is pale that tried the puzzle of their prison and solved it with an unexpected kiss, whose freckled, unsuspected hands alit. So, this is a different poem about rain. This was the second part of a 4-poem sequence that Bishop published in the Partisan Review in 1951. Bishop was a deeply private poet, especially about love. She rarely published her love poems, and many weren't found until well after she died. This one made it through, and when someone once asked Bishop about this poem's strange syntax, she said, "But it's obvious." And it wasn't. She wanted it to be both hidden and seen. And I have to say that this is something that I really appreciate about poetry, is it seems obvious to the poet. I say this all the time for myself, because I will write something and then I'll give it to Ben, and he knows my writing so well that he reads it and he'll stop and say, "It's very obvious to you, isn't it?" I'm like, "Yes, it is. I wrote it on the paper. It's so obvious." He's like, "It's not obvious to the reader, and you have to write it again." And that's love. That's love. Telling you that it's not obvious. It's still in your head. And so I appreciate when she's like, "But it's obvious." But it's not. This poem is sharing imagery with an earlier unpublished piece, and it's called "It is Marvelous to Wake Up Together." And it was written in the 40s, and both poems use rain as a cage that finally breaks open, releasing lovers into the morning. So what's interesting about this poem is the whole poem is one sentence. It is just a single breath held and then released. It starts with destruction, with the great light cage has broken up in the air, and then it ends in tenderness, freckled, unsuspected hands alit. And then you have the birds that are wild, ascending, shadowed, and then gone. And so what's left? A pale face, an unexpected kiss, and hands landing somewhere soft. Bishop also uses unsuspected instead of unexpected for the hands. Unsuspected means not known to exist. These hands were a secret, even to the person being touched. This is a very personal poem. She's writing, but she doesn't really care what the reader sees. She's like, "This is my poem, and I know where the hands were. This is my poem, I know where the rain was. This is my poem, I wrote it for myself." And it's kind of bold statement. So how does this change how we see the rain? The rain is the cage, and also what breaks it. The storm is the night of confusion, the puzzle of their prison. But as the rain brightens towards morning, the wires fall. The frightened birds disappear. The rain doesn't trap you there. It's the thing that, by ending, sets you free. And then the clearing is the kiss. Love solves things you didn't know were puzzles. You wake up next to someone, and the chaos of the night, the wild birds, the cage, the wires, is just gone. Not explained, not dissolved. Bishop doesn't tell us who kissed whom or what the prison was. She just shows us the pale face, the freckled hands, the morning after the storm. And that's enough, because it's everything. Oh, it's so nice. Okay, ready for number 5? This is number 5. This is the last one. And this is After the Rain by Jared Carter. This is in 1993, and it's a Midwestern poem. Okay, After the Rain by Jared Carter. After the rain, it's time to walk the field, again near where the river bends. Each year I come to look for what this place will yield. Lost things still rising here. The farmer's plow turns over without fail, a crop of arrowheads, but where or why they fall is hard to say. They seem like hail dropped from an empty sky. Yet for an hour or two after the rain has washed away the dusty afterbirth of their return, a few will show up plain on the reopened earth. Still, even these are hard to see. At first, they look like any other stone. The trick to finding them is not to be too sure about what's known. Convictions liable to say straight off, this one's a leaf or that one's merely clay, and miss the point. After the rain, soft furrows show one way across the field, but what is hidden here requires a different view. The glance of one not looking straight ahead, who in the clear light of morning sun simply keeps wandering across the rows, letting his own perspective change. After the rain, perhaps something will show, glittering and strange. Carver, his family moved to the Midwest in the early 1800s. I think it was like 1816. His family went to Indiana, and they walked the same fields that his ancestors walked. The poem comes from a 1993 collection, and it's called After the Rain, and it won the Poets Prize. And Carter has said his main subject is the American heartland from earliest times to present. And this poem is exactly what he wanted, or what he was striving for. It is a man returning each year to a plowed field near a river bend, looking for arrowheads that rise to the surface after a storm. And he's looking for evidence of the people who were here before. So what's interesting about this? The form is deceptively casual. There are short stanzas, there are simple rhymes, but the argument is very precise. Carter is teaching you how to see. The trick, he says, is not to be too sure about what's known. If you look straight ahead, you'll miss it. If you're certain that stone is just a stone, then you'll walk right past it. The arrowheads only reveal themselves to someone willing to wander and to let their perspective change. And then also, the dusty afterbirth of their return, that line that has the word afterbirth, it makes the arrowheads into something being born again. The earth is laboring. The rain is the delivery. So the rain becomes a revelation. It washes away the dust. It reopens the earth, making visible what is buried. But the poem isn't about the rain doing the work. It's about what you do after. The rain creates the conditions. You still have to show up. You still have to walk the rows. You still have to look sideways. The rain is the invitation. The finding is yours. What he's saying is that the past doesn't stay buried. It keeps rising. It is a crop of arrowheads that the plow turns over every year. But you have to be the right kind of searcher. You have to be patient, uncertain, willing to be wrong. There's a conviction. There's a confidence that you already know what you're looking at, and you might miss everything. The poem ends with perhaps. It's not a guarantee. It is just the possibility that if you stay open, something will show, glittering and strange. I chose that poem because I think that keeping our eyes open is so important, to see the rain in a different light, in a different mood, in, I don't know, something different. And I wanted to encourage all of us, when we see things, maybe we should be patient and just wait a second longer. What else will pop up? So, that is the episode for today. That is poems that... Okay, my poetry friends, that is all for today. If you've enjoyed diving into the world of verse and standing in the rain with us, please join us next time. We've got more poets to meet, more poems to explore, and more literary adventures to share. So until then, keep reading, keep writing, and keep poetry close to your heart. Thank you for joining Poetics, where we bring poetry to life, one verse at a time.